Did John Fisher's final letter to Oakland A's fans have any truth to it? I don't know, but let's find out today on Locked On A's.
You are Locked On A's, your daily podcast on the Athletics, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On A's, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I am your host, Booney. One name, all passion. Thank you for making Locked On A's your first listen of the day. I'm from the Bay Area, and I've been a diehard A's fan since 1981. This isn't just another A's podcast. This is the most informative and insightful show on the A's, period. We cover the A's every single day, breaking down games, delivering the latest team news, and giving you deep, thoughtful analysis you will not find anywhere else. If it's happening in Sacramento or in Vegas, we've got it covered. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. And please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button wherever you are following the show. Today's episode is brought to you in part by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. In this era of rapid information where opinions are formed in seconds and divisions cemented in moments, the necessity of understanding perspectives beyond our own has never been more urgent. To consider only one side of an issue is to see the world through a keyhole, blind to the vastness of the room beyond. Every argument, every belief, every stance is born from a lived experience, a unique journey that deserves to be acknowledged, even if it differs from our own. When we step into another person's shoes, we do not surrender our values, we expand them. We gain insight into the fears, hopes, and dreams that drive others. We begin to see that those who disagree with us are not our enemies, but fellow travelers navigating the complexities of existence. History has taught us that progress is born not from echo chambers, but from dialogue. The greatest breakthroughs, whether in science, politics, art, or sports, have come from those willing to challenge their own assumptions and engage with opposing views. To look at an issue from both sides is not a sign of indecision, it is a mark of wisdom. It requires courage to confront ideas that unsettle us and humility to admit when we might be wrong. Today, I have John Peterson on the show, a lifelong baseball enthusiast, a devoted Oakland A's fan, and a man with stories as rich as the game itself. John's connection to the A's runs deep. He shared unforgettable moments with team executives like Michael Crowley, who rose from CFO to president of the team. Whether it was spring training trips filled with camaraderie or witnessing the iconic hug between Billy Beane and Crowley after the A's clinched the AL West in 2012. John has a front row seat to history. His career runs for decades in the government sector. His background brings a unique perspective. He understands the complexity of sports economics, city politics, and infrastructure development. His insights into Oakland's struggles and the A's move to Las Vegas reflect not just his fandom, but his deep understanding of how cities and teams intersect. Did the A's do everything they can to stay in Oakland? We are led to believe that they did not. John thinks otherwise. I am going to challenge his perspective. I am going to ask the hard questions. And by the end of tomorrow, I hope to provide you and myself with enough information to form your own opinion. Maybe I will learn something from John. Maybe he will learn something from me. Or maybe we will just agree to disagree. Whatever it is, we will look at the issue from both sides. That I promise you. Part 1 of 2, John Peterson. John, my take has always been that the A's departure from the city of Oakland was due to missed opportunities by both the city of Oakland and the A's. And I will say that I believe the city tried harder to keep the A's in Oakland than the A's tried to stay in Oakland. For me, the A's left Oakland, and they did it with a trail of contradictions, half measures, and shifting goalposts that made it clear to me this was never a fight to stay. It was a slow, calculated march towards the exit. With that being said, I do believe if this was the Raiders, the city would have found a way to get it done. Now, here's what I mean by half measures and contradictions. First and foremost, why did the A's insist on a BART station being built next to their proposed stadium in East Oakland, but then suddenly deemed it unnecessary for Cisco Field in Fremont, which was 5 miles from the nearest station? Was that a convenient shifting of standards to justify leaving? In 2018, the A's presented the Coliseum as a viable backup option. I don't know if you remember. MLB reportedly threatened Oakland, saying the team would leave if the city didn't sell its half of the Coliseum site to the A's. The city ended up doing that, and A's president Dave Kaval came out and said the A's now have a guaranteed path to a new stadium if Howard Terminal does not work out. Yet, a few years later, they insisted it was Howard Terminal or bust. And speaking of Howard Terminal, going back in time a little bit, if you remember, Lou Wolf dismissed Howard Terminal as impossible in 2012. Wolf said that building on Treasure Island would have been easier. For me, looking back at this whole thing, and again, I'm not going to go through every single site and the whole deal, but these are just a few examples of, for me, what it seemed was one thing or another with the A's. Impossible asks that just seemed to delay everything. Doubling season ticket prices in 2021 after trading away key players. It just all felt like a bigger plan to get out of the city. I don't believe the A's truly ever wanted to say. But you have a different take than I've ever heard, which is refreshing, and it definitely sparks some interest. In other words, the final letter John Fisher wrote, where he said he tried everything he did, you believe that's truth?
Well, from his perspective, he tried everything. I don't think he tried everything. I would say that the interesting part is that if you're in a conversation with John Fisher, Dave Cobble, Michael Crowley, and you ask some of these questions, what's interesting.
Michael Crowley was the former president of the A's before
right.
Dave Cobble. Okay,
that's right. And what you find is a lot of really important detail, things that were consequential that you don't really think about from the outside, and an overarching conclusion that they definitely wanted to stay. Now, did they drive too hard a bargain at times? I think so. I think some of the contradictions you say that people believe usually have a logical explanation. The Howard Terminal one, for example, I mean, there were some pretty severe challenges with Howard Terminal.
The lawsuits.
There's the folks that just didn't want him to come there. I think before they took a little closer look and started pushing a little bit harder, it was legitimate to say that doesn't look viable to me. And then you push a little bit, and you realize, you know what, that is viable. I can't really speak to the BART issue, nor some of these other ones. And but I do know that I've stood there while these questions were asked, particularly of Michael Crowley. And like, for example, the tarping of the upper deck.
Yes.
He said, we would have only sold tickets there on a couple of occasions based on our ticket sales. And you remember eventually we'd have a playoff game and they actually did open it up.
Yes.
And because, they're leaving money on the table, right? And so his take was, you're trying to create demand. You're trying to not just intimacy, but you're trying to make it, you're trying to make your product seem a little more special. I think that they were kind of embarrassed, when they're drawing 10 or 12,000 or even 20,000, and you've got the massive empty seats up there. I think that it looked more like the A's were a product that you might want to be interested in without all of those empty seats up there. I think it was a strategic decision to make the product look a little bit more in demand. I just think that was a bad look up there. So I didn't, and because they didn't sell enough tickets to really use it, I didn't really hold that against them. The way it was explained to me, I bought the explanation. And so, but some of these issues that you bring up, no one can really know. We consider them evidence that they didn't really want to stay.
Sure.
But you can't get in somebody's head, and you don't really know why. It could very well be that in every one of those cases.
I agree. Everything as far as what I say is speculative, right?
Right.
We're speculating on it. That's what it looks like, but we don't have a firm determination. Partly because we're here to make our own conclusions because the A's don't talk.
True enough. I don't think they communicated very well. I will say this though, and this is why it's really the main reason that I believe that their efforts to stay were legitimate.
Okay. I
sat there with executives of the Oakland A's many times. I happen to know, Michael Crowley, and you might say, and I don't want to pretend like we're best friends or anything like
sure.
that.
Yeah.
Michael has a lot of friends. He's a great guy. But listening to him, it would be impossible for you to walk away thinking that they were not legitimate. He is a no BS guy. He's a great guy. He's funny. He's a great guy to sit and talk to. And he's not quite the glad hand guy like Covell. And that's why, when the stadium effort really started to get down serious, they put Covell in there, who has experience, getting new things put in and can mix it up with politicians and so forth, maybe a little bit better than Mike. And I have one story that certainly would indicate that. But,
John, real quick.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just to go back a little bit, you mentioned conversations with Crowley that gave you the sense that they wanted to stay. Was there an instance or a moment or a sentence? What was an example, just a small example of that? What gave you that sense of the commitment to stay?
I asked him, are these guys really committed? He says, yeah, absolutely. And if Michael, I don't know if he's capable of lying, honestly.
Got it.
And it was more than that occasion. And sometimes when people would have complaints, he would explain the details and the dirty nitty gritty about why a particular decision was made. And you'd go, oh, wow, I wish more people knew that, which of course is why I think your point about communication is really huge. I don't know how much difference it would have made for them to get a little bit more in the weeds on their decision-making process. But from my perspective of sitting there listening to some of the explanations, I certainly think they could have done a better job of communicating some of those things. But the bottom line, Rooney, is you sit there and listen to them talk about the ownership and Lou in particular. I think Michael was probably a little closer to Lou. You'd see them sitting together behind home plate all the time for the games talking. And I know Lou Wolf really wanted to keep the A's in the Bay Area. With John Fisher, I don't know as much about John. But again, from if you had a conversation with ex-President Michael Crowley, I think that you come away convinced that they did definitely want to stay. And so that's my sort of overarching belief, in addition to the fact that I was involved in conversations where a lot of the more controversial things were explained, the details were explained, and you go, oh, wow, I didn't think about it like that. But did they try hard enough? Well, I don't think so, because because I tend to be a little bit more of the belief that if you really have the right leadership, you can make things happen, and that goes for Oakland, the city of Oakland too. You really have to go out to the people. I know that's what Dave Covell was really trying to do with the Rooted in Oakland thing, because they knew there were a lot of competing interests for limited resources, the city of Oakland.
This episode is brought to you in part by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. By many in the Bay Area and probably in the country right now, think of the Rooted in Oakland campaign as just a stall tactic. Nothing meant. You felt it was real?
Absolutely, positively. You don't go out and spend that much money and make that much of an earnest effort just as a ploy. It absolutely, positively not. I would say, though, that if there's a little element of doubt for me, about Fisher in particular's effort, it comes when Vegas becomes a viable option. Because if you think about it, for a long time when the A's were trying to get a new venue built, Vegas was not an option. And I certainly think that the A's ownership's options were much more narrow. And I think that their focus was much more legitimate. When the Vegas opportunity started to present itself, then from that point forward, I am a little bit more skeptical. And I think that everybody has a right to be a little more skeptical, because you're talking about the value of your franchise, right? You've got a city that is, to some in some people's opinion, that's in decline. They don't have a lot of new development.
Right.
They don't have a lot of revenue to pay for infrastructure. They have serious budget problems, and they have image problems. And all of a sudden, you know that if you go over to Vegas, the value of your franchise is just going to skyrocket. And
Right.
that's one of every owner in baseball wants the value of their franchise to go up.
Sure.
And so I think at that point, I am a little bit more in tune with you with respect to how hard they tried. But again, I can't say. I mean, even after Vegas became viable, I still think that they wanted to stay in Oakland. But I think the competition for an alternative started to present itself. And, and in fact, the city was not able to fill its commitments in time. That's just a fact. And I don't really blame the city of Oakland. I have a background in government finance, and well, the first thing you have to understand is that the money that is used to pay for infrastructure comes from development. It doesn't come from the taxpayers or the ratepayers, especially in California with I think Prop 218. What that means is that if you want money for infrastructure, say around Howard Terminal, that money has to come from other developers paying the city for what's called connection fees or impact fees is what it used to be called. So to tap into the sewer system, to tap into the water system, you have to pay a fee. Now, a big project like this, normally a municipality does not expect that developer to pay for all of that infrastructure. The payment for that infrastructure comes from a big bucket where all the new development is paying the city to tap into their resources. And with Oakland, you just don't have a lot of new development. We say growth pays for growth, which means that it is the new development that pays for the extra costs of the infrastructure for that development. The money can't come from other places. This puts a lot of pressure on a place like the city of Oakland because they just don't have a lot of capital money available for this kind of stuff. And when you talk about bonds, borrowing the money for something like this, it circles back to exactly what you said, which is really a result of competing interest. You got a lot of needs. You got housing, you got homelessness, you got all kinds of things going on. And if you're going to borrow money to pay for something, the citizens are looking at you and thinking, really, you're going to go out for bonds for a professional sports franchise?
Or a billionaire owner, right?
The studies indicate that it's not a good payback for municipalities, which I think is totally false, actually, because they hold up these studies. And most of these studies involve municipalities that are paying for 100% of the project, not just a small portion. I have no doubt, and I wonder if Oakland did a feasibility study that asked the question, if we spend $800 million on this infrastructure via bonds, because we're not going to have the capital money for that, how long would it take for us to get paid back in the additional revenue, the sales taxes, the sewer bills, the water bills, and all that stuff? And I would imagine that on 800 million, it'd be quite a while. So in the beginning, I was kind of harsh with Oakland, thinking, why doesn't a leader really stand up and sell this? I think Coble's effort to sell it was totally legitimate. And I think that it failed. And it failed because Oakland just doesn't have the money for this kind of stuff.
At the very end, it was presented to us that they did have the money. Was it just too late? Or, excuse me, the difference was a very small amount of money that could have been bridged easily if it wanted to get done. At that point, was it too late?
Well, Major League Baseball said it was too late. And I think that's where we get into the competition from Vegas and the fans having a little bit more of a legitimate gripe. They were close, and the A's and Major League Baseball said too late. And would they have done that if Vegas was not a viable option? I don't think so. I think they would have continued to be patient, and they would have waited it out, and they would have gotten it done. If you go back 5 or 6 or 7 years before Vegas became an option and everything else is the same, the A's would be staying in Oakland. And I think it just became too attractive of an option. And there's a lot of ifs, right? If the city of Oakland, somebody really stepped up who was a charismatic leader and could really persuade people and talk about the payback, would have done that earlier in the game, and they would have had the full, 800 million or whatever in time for MLB. The A's really wouldn't have had much of a choice but to stay. But they were late. The A's did have other options by that point. And I know there's a lot about it that I don't know. A lot of the inner workings in the ownership of the A's and in the politicians and the stakeholders in Oakland. But what we do know is that they were close, as you say. And it makes me a little bit suspicious that at that point, the momentum was, this Vegas thing is just too good to pass up. I really think one of the problems was Oakland not having a leader who said, we're going to turn this town around, and this is how we're going to do it, and having a game plan for that. I think they sit on their heels a little bit. They do have what appear to be insurmountable problems, so you have to feel for them. But look, the employees of these bureaucracies do very well, and in the good times they get these fantastic contracts. And I know I was one of those people, and then things turn a little bit south, and all of a sudden you are obligated to a lot of people. You've got additional problems pouring in. You have less development. Your revenues are going down, and you end up in a position where it's really difficult for you to sustain the viability of a professional sports franchise, and frankly, to look attractive to Major League Baseball and to the A's. And when you have what some consider a failing municipality.
I had a Oakland fan on the show a few weeks back, and we got in a little bit of a debate with regard to the whole situation, the stadium, the attendance, etc. I've been always a proponent of free agents and signings do not matter if you are winning games. And the A's have definitely done that, even since 2000. I don't care what your payroll is if you are winning, if you are successful. And how I judge success is if you make it to the postseason. He said, listen, he goes, every fan base has 10,000 of your hardcore fans, which, I'm included in that. You probably are, many others. He goes, the other 15,000 or so, 10,000, 20,000, whatever number it may be, are there for the big names, the free agent signings, the stadium, the experience, not necessarily the ball players on the field. And that's what the A's were missing. The A's never spent. That's a fact. That's undeniable. In the Haas years, they spent. The fans showed, but in three of those years, 89 and 92, 4 of those years, they're the top 5 in payroll, and I believe in the top 10 in attendance. But we're talking 4 out of 56 years of the history of the A's. Haas spent money, went to Schott. They didn't spend a nickel. Went in the hole, went to Fisher. He didn't spend, so forth. How can you defend the non-spending?
I know it's really hard for people to accept, and I get it, but the absolute fact is every team in Major League Baseball, the owners do not pay the player contracts. The fans do. In every other major league town, if you have the 6th most wins in all of in baseball from 2000 to 2022, and you make the playoffs at a 50% clip, people are going to show, and you're going to sign broadcast deals that enable you to sign long-term player contracts. And the A's won a lot, obviously, because they would develop superstars, trade them away, get good young players in exchange, and their retools were a lot shorter than a lot of other teams. But the reality is, in other Major League Baseball parks, you could have some aging stars and some up and comers and just lose, and then you turn around to retool. You get some new players in. It takes a couple of years, and they too become superstars. And then you take the money and you sign a bunch of lucrative free agent contracts.
Right.
The reason that you're able to do that through the tough times is because the fans still show, and the broadcast revenue is still there. And with the A's, they won, but the fans didn't come. You mentioned Walter Haas. He lost millions, and I think that the fans were on their heels a little bit in Oakland. And the basic argument was, and I heard it all the time, the owners should spend the money, they should invest and sign long-term contracts, and then we'll win, and then we'll show. Right. And the owner will get their money back. And let me just tell you that is not how it works. Maybe the Dodgers a little bit, but Major League Baseball teams do not spend money on player contracts from their wealth, from other business. operations, non-baseball business operations. They just don't do it. And so Schott bought the team to build a new venue. Fisher and Wolf to build a new venue. Were they tightwads along the way? Absolutely. But there were times when, Coco Chris made $10 million. We paid $10 million for a reliever a few years ago who never pitched. Baseball can be a tough game, But I had a friend who said, "Who's your Buster Posey?" And I said, "Josh Donaldson." He's like, "Who's that?" Well, see, I just watched somebody, and this would happen all the time.
Yeah.
As a season ticket holder, you'd watch these guys blossom into superstars for like 3 years, whether it's Olsen or, whoever. And then they'd be gone and we'd all complain. Well, hey, I got to watch them for 3 years. All right. You're waiting until they are already a big name to show up. And then we can't afford to keep them because of that. So I really think fans have to remember that, with that much winning, that's one thing I feel a little bit of empathy for ownership. They both Schott and Fisher, in spite of their tight ways, the fact that we won. I mean, you'd be sitting there. 2014 is a perfect example. Best record in baseball at the break, and I have a partial season ticket plan. I'm looking around at the Coliseum, empty seats everywhere, like 12, 15,000 on a Saturday afternoon. We have these awesome, young, exciting players. They're the kind of players that fans love. They're accessible. They're hungry. And they are playing at the highest level in all of baseball, and no one shows up. That dynamic right there, no matter what anybody says about what Fisher did or what the city did, ultimately, the fact that we're winning so much and people weren't showing up, that was our demise.
You mentioned Josh Donaldson. And here's the frustration that I can see a casual fan having. I was pissed. And I'm sure at the time you were pissed. But looking back at it now with what here's the issue I had with Josh Donaldson. We traded Josh Donaldson for a bucket of dirt. And he was still under team control for another 4 years. That does not make any sense to me. If he is 2 years up on a contract year and you're like, hey, I don't want to pay him, I get it. Now, I understand he had issues with Billy Beane.
That's right.
He was vocal with regard to ownership spending and with not really knowing. So he made some comments and
That's
so
right.
forth. But at the same time, you got an MVP candidate under team control. There's your Buster Posey that we trade. I mean, there's been more loudmouths than Josh Donaldson. And that's something that when the fans talk about being frustrated with players leaving, that's the example. I can't defend that one.
Yeah, and Cespedes is another good example there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm only speculating when I say this, but
right.
And I've only met Billy Beane once, but I think there were some egos there. I don't think the A's.
So you think it was a baseball general manager move and not an ownership move?
Yeah, I think it was. If I had to speculate on that, I'd say that the A's ownership and front office has very little tolerance for that kind of thing from their players. I don't know. You mentioned other people being loudmouths, and I don't know if they've become more tolerant, but it seems to me that if the A's have a little bit of a history of getting rid of disgruntled players. And do I agree with that? No. I mean, you put your ego aside and pay the guy as a fan. Now, what would Billy say? What would Lou and Fisher say about that? I have no idea. But I do know this in general, when people talk about keeping players, I know that the big three in the early 2000s would have been $500 million, but $500 million in contracts to keep all three of those guys. And I know that that's a bit of an extreme example, but
I don't think so. I mean, John Lester was through the roof.
Yeah. I tell you, another thing about it that sometimes we don't think about, you did mention exiting playoffs early a lot of times, right? Well, if the A's would have been more successful in the playoffs, instead of getting jettisoned in the first round so many times, that would have been a lot of revenue. That would have been a lot of revenue. I don't buy the myth. I don't buy the argument that the A's didn't have enough high level players to get deeper into the playoffs. I don't buy that at all, because they often dominated during the season. There's no reason that you get into the playoffs that you can't do the same thing. And if you look at the playoffs, I mean, it was a bad call here. It was, the wrong guy
sports,
slumping.
That's
The
sports.
wrong guy slumping at the wrong time. I mean, all of these little things conspired for us to not go deeper in the playoffs. That would have been a serious chunk of change with which to finance player contracts. And so, that's just another one of the reasons. But, Haas lost millions. Owners do not buy championships anymore. The gate and the broadcast contracts pay the players. The A's won marketing awards. They were committed. I wish they would have spent some of their own money. I wish we would have gone deeper in the playoffs. I wish we'd have kept Donaldson and Cespedes. And, but there's so many things that I don't know, but I do know this. Every time I talk to an A's executive over the years since 1991, I was totally convinced that they wanted to stay in the Bay.
Thank you for making Locked On A's your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball Podcast with host Dominic Martino and Matthew Onai. MLB fantasy draft season is here. Be the most informed fan and set yourself up for a league win. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I will see you tomorrow for part 2 of the discussion with John Peterson. Take it easy, guys.